Hello, all of you. I'm Kanishk Shekhar for Vitasta Publishing, and I'm going to talk about this wonderful book, Indian Constitution Conflicts and Controversies by Mr. Subhas Kashyap. So, this book is actually a wonderful commentary on the Indian Constitution. And what exactly is Indian Constitution? What is the necessity of a constitution? This question I have come across many times. This book starts with this. It explains from where the legal acumen comes from. So it delves deeper and it goes back to the Vedic era. From there on, it proceeds. It comes to the this Harappan culture. Also, it mentions quite a bit about it. Then it goes into Kautilya's Arthashastra. The reason it says that we need a set of common laws to govern subjects, that is citizens. In monarchies, they were called subjects. Now we are all citizens because there is no monarchy. We live in democracies. So this book explains actually that why do we need a set of common laws in order to govern a diverse set of people? Because in the absence of a common set of laws, what would happen that there will be total anarchy. So here comes the king, and it aptly mentions these things. Mr. Kashyap has very well talked about these things. He says that he quotes from Manusmriti that dharmo evam hatohanti, dharmo rakshati rakshita. Protect dharma and dharma shall protect you is what this book says here. Now, where does this come from? That king must do the right, yes. King must not discriminate between his subjects and uphold the law of the land. Until this happens, until favoritism is undone with, there cannot be a welfare state, which even still is very relevant. Now, from there, we all know what happened. Why constitution? Trying to answer this question. And the first chapter, which says that Vedic era and Kautilya's Arthashastra mention certain do's and don'ts for the ideal king. Now, gone were the days of the ideal kings. So, not so very ideal kings came everywhere in the world. So, that is what necessitated revolution. And post French and American Revolution, people realized that we need a common set of laws. Now, this is where the constitution comes from. My interpretation of justice might differ from your interpretation of justice. So, what do we actually adhere to? The constitution. This defines what actually justice is. So, all modern democracies are run by constitution. That is why India also has a constitution, because there are different stakeholders in India, different set of people divided across religion, caste, region, linguistic identities. So there are many social cleavages in India, many fault lines. These fault lines must have something common, and that common thing is provided by the constitution. All laws of the land must adhere with the constitution. That is what it becomes. Now, moving ahead from the historical background of why we need a constitution and the earliest attempt to make laws for the greater good of the people, the second chapter deals with what is called federalism. A very interesting topic, though. It's often questioned that is India a federal state or a unitary state? Federal means there are two layers of government, the union and the states. We have state governments headed by the respective chief ministers. We have the union government headed by the Honorable Prime Minister. So this is what federalism is. But India is not a true federation like America. USA is the real federation. England is not a federation, it's a union. So all these things are very lucidly explained in this book, and why India is a federation of its own type. There is no other example of a federation like India. There are circumstances where the union can take over the states. The Parliament of India can pass laws regarding the state subjects. Now, when does these things happen? There are provisions in the constitution. There are emergency provisions, Article 352, 356, and 360, that is financial emergency. And then there are also conditions when Rajya Sabha can pass laws on the state list, which are otherwise regulated by the respective Vidhan Sabhas or state assemblies. So all these provisions make India a federation of its own type, which we do not find anywhere else. So all these provisions are very well explained in this book. Now, from there on, it explains what is the parliamentary form of government which India actually subscribed to. When India became free, we had two options, either to go for a presidential form of government or to stick with the parliamentary form of government. But since we were ruled by the British and there were provincial elections held under the British, author has quoted these provincial elections. There were 7 to 8 provinces where Congress won before 1947, and the provincials means today's states. So Congress was was able to form government in these provinces. So India actually had a first-hand experience with parliamentary form of government. That is why instead of the presidential form, because of the little experience that Indians had, we accepted the parliamentary form of government. Now, parliamentary form of government, Kashyap ji has explained, it also says that the executive is accountable and responsible to the legislature. Legislature means the place where the laws are made. Who makes the laws? The executive makes. Where? In the legislature. So what exactly is the fine difference between executive and legislature is very well explained with apt examples in the book. Now, parliamentary form of government has its own merits and demerits. So these all these aspects are also included here. Now, moving on from there, it explains that how formation of government happens. You need to achieve that magical figure, that is 272 in the lower house, that is Lok Sabha of India. Now, once that is done, some very, very important aspect that this book discusses, like there is this chapter 6, which says coalition and minority governments. Rajiv Gandhi won the highest seat in Lok Sabha. He got more than 400 MPs way back in 1984, post Indira Gandhi's demise. Now, post Rajiv Gandhi, it took Narendra Modi in 2014 to get a majority on its own, which means from 84 to 2014, from 89 to 2014, Rajiv Gandhi lasted from 84 to 89. He won his first election, lost the next election. Why he lost VP Singh and Bofors, this book actually does not go into all these. So from 89 to 2014, there were coalition governments where different parties came together to achieve that magical figure, that is 272. Now, what were the compulsions? Under which circumstances they came together? The politics of opportunism, as Subhash Kashyap calls it, and so many things, so many aspects he has unfolded in his book about all these things. Now, again, very important aspect of Indian parliamentary democracy is secularism, Hinduism, and minorities. So this word secularism, although also stated in this book, was inserted to the 42nd Amendment. India was undergoing emergency at that time. Indira Gandhi was almost acting as an autocratic leader. And 3 words were introduced in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, that is secularism, socialism, and integrity. So though inserted in through 42nd Amendment in the emergency era, this word has always been somewhere inculcated in the Indian Constitution. In fact, the Vedas itself says that Eko Satya Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti, truth is one, sages call it by different names. So this is the essence of secularism, that it's not like my truth is the ultimate truth. There is no exclusivity. This is the Indian way of life. This is the Hindu way of life. Now, secularism, once it is mentioned in the Constitution, then what happened after that? A very critical examination is given in this book. Secularism, how it delved into minority appeasement, the Ram Janambhoomi movement, and before that, the Shah Bano historic judgment by the Supreme Court, how Rajiv Gandhi overturned the Shah Bano verdict in the parliament, then how entire this Ram Janambhoomi Andolan became a mass movement, and the emergence of BJP. The BJP, which got 2 seats in 1984, went on to win more than 80 seats in 1999 elections. So that was nothing short of electoral miracle for a party. Now, after that, it also goes into grassroots governance, the 73rd and 74th Amendment. Although passed by P.V. Narasimha Rao when he was the Prime Minister, attempts were made by Rajiv Gandhi. He could not get the bill passed. Nagaur was the first district in Rajasthan where panchayats were brought way back in the decades of 50, but there was no constitutional obligation regarding it. Subhash Kashyap also quotes the views of Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar on democratic decentralization, their views on panchayat, and they are radically different from each other. Gandhiji favored panchayat, Ambedkar was dead against it. Now, why so? You need to read the book for it. Again, once these constitutional recognition was given through the 73rd and 74th Amendment to panchayat and urban local bodies, what happened after that? Atal Bihari Vajpayee, as Prime Minister, called panchayat as paper tigers, kagaj ke sher hain. And there is an IJPA journal which says that it's been ruled by a band of husbands, despite 33% reservation given to women in urban, local, and panchayat bodies. So, what has been the functioning of grassroots governance despite a constitutional mechanism to help them? This book goes into a critical analysis. A full chapter is dedicated to this, chapter number 8. Now, the second part of the book talks about making and working of the constitution. It quotes several stalwarts of modern India, the likes of Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, so on and so forth. These people were members of Constituent Assembly. Now, the Constituent Assembly debates are again a very, rich learning experience for any student of Indian Constitution and law. So they are mentioned in bits and pieces. Why fundamental rights should be like this and not like that? It did not happen in a day. There were a lot of contemplations, debates, and discussions in the Constituent Assembly, and very interesting anecdotes have been mentioned, which Subhash Kashyap has mentioned in his book about these things. Moving on from here, there are something called parliamentary privileges. What exactly is parliamentary privileges? Because it is not defined in the Constitution. Is it accorded only to the MPs or also to the MLAs in Vidhan Sabhas? So these are certain open-ended questions which Subhash Kashyap, being the constitutional jurist that he is, has tried to explain. And moving on from here, there is this very basic and very pertinent doctrine of basic structure, which came after the Keshwanand Bharti judgment, the landmark judgment of Keshwanand Bharti, where a 13-judge constitutional bench, highest ever in India, gave a 7-6 verdict on what is called the basic structure of India. Now, some people of late argue, there are many columnists who say that it's an open sword in the hands of judiciary. It can cut away everything with this basic structure doctrine. For example, the Parliament of India passed the NJAC bill in 2014-15. Judiciary called it a violation of basic structure and null and void. NJAC is null and void. NJAC was brought to replace the collegium system. Now, once judiciary does this, where is it going to stop? We have seen cases recently, the corona pandemic going on. The Supreme Court bench says that Delhi should be given its allotted share of oxygen. Now, the same Supreme Court audit panel finds that Delhi inflated its demand by 4 times. So, on what basis Supreme Court of India asked the central government to listen to Delhi government when their panel itself finds fault? So, is judiciary coming into the sacrosanct domain of policy making? Is it constitutionally valid? Because Constitution also talks about checks and balance, where all the 3 organs, that is legislature, executive, and judiciary, have to do their work and refrain from entering into the other's territory. So is Parliament going to pronounce cases? Certainly not. Then why is judiciary coming into policy making? Why is judiciary trying to pass the laws and policies? That is the work of the elected representative. Why do we have Parliament for that? Why do we have elected representative for that? Is this the domain of a judge? So this basic structure has raised several questions, and this has also been examined in this book. And then there's a very interesting chapter 24, which says how to discipline judge. Now, how to discipline judges itself remains a very forbidden topic. People don't speak when it comes to judiciary. They fear contempt of court. But what exactly constitutes the contempt of court? Has it been anywhere defined in the Constitution? The answer is no. So it is again to the interpretation of the honorable judges of the Supreme Court and High Courts. So how to discipline the judges? Do we need a judicial accountability bill? Do we need a mechanism to replace NJAC and make judiciary more accountable and responsive to the needs of the public? And all the backlogs that are there in the courts. A study says that it will take at least 324 years to resolve the backlogs that are pending before the courts of India. So how to make justice fast and, it should be within a time frame. All these things are mentioned by Subhash Kashyap. He gives his own pertinent analysis on these things. Then also it talks about politics of defection and anti-defection laws. It was the 10th schedule that deals with these things. So how effective 10th schedule has been? 10th schedule to the Indian Constitution that talks about defection and anti-defection law. Has it checked what legendary stories of Ayaram and Gairam? An MP in the morning he was in some party, in the afternoon he was in some other party, and by evening he was again back to the same party. So legendary Ayaram and Gairam story this was. So has the formation of 10th schedule to the Indian constitution been able to check such IRMs and GARMs? So again, there is a critical analysis about this important subject in the book. There is this Prime Minister and defection, how Prime Minister as the first amongst equal in the Union Cabinet can take care of defection. So he has offered his valuable insights on these things. So overall, this book is a good read, and it offers us an insight of a brilliant mind of Constitution, Mr. Subhas Kashyap, who is a living legend. He has been Lok Sabha Secretary General. He's an authority on the Indian Constitution. And at the end, what exactly is Constitution? I started this video by why do we need a Constitution? Because of the uniformity, because there are different stakeholders, because there are diverse interests. My views can differ from your views and vice versa. So we need a uniformity in the form of Constitution. So all of us, irrespective of our identity, irrespective of our priorities, irrespective of our ideology, will subscribe to it. Now, what exactly is Constitution? At best, it is a tool. Some people give mythical status to Constitution. It's a book, it's an enabling tool, how the governance will be done. And laws change as per the society. So tomorrow, if society does not favor anything, that has to be changed, irrespective of whether there is a constitutional mandate or not. Same Constitution has witnessed more than 100 amendments. Dr. Ambedkar, the chairman of planning this drafting committee of Constitution, said that Constitution is a living document. It's not a static concept. It's like a flowing river, not a static river that will sting, that will breed mosquitoes. This contaminated water, which is stuck. So it is a flowing river. Fresh thoughts are brought. So interpretations and reinterpretations keep on happening. It is ultimately the people of India who decide the content, and it starts, the Constitution first word, the preamble, that is the introduction, starts with this wonderful phrase, we the people. Interestingly, American Constitution also starts with the same phrase, we the people. It says the source of the Constitution comes from people. We are the people who have given ourselves this Constitution. So once we feel that this provision needs to be undone, there is a parliament which will do that. We are the one who elect the parliamentarians. They are there because of our votes. So collective wisdom prevails, and all democracies function on what is called utilitarianism, that is maximum good for maximum numbers. So someone or the other will always have a problem. It is about majority, electoral majority. I'm not saying linguistic or religious majority. The electoral majority is on which side. Only that party, that particular set of politicians will be able to bring change through democratic method. So that is the essence of this very book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. Hope everyone of you who do the same will share the same feeling. Namaskar.